I'm delighted today to talk with Marie Stein, who is our, May, we're coming up on May, guest creative. She and I have known each other for several years. She has launched her own business after a successful career of another sort. And as usual, I could introduce her in a formal way, but I always like to turn the tables a little bit. So I'm going to invite you. Thank you, Marie, for being here. And I'm going to invite you to tell us what you would say if you were supposed to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm like so thrilled to be here. And I want to mention I am a CST, 2018 graduate, I think. And this is how we met, and this just was a wonderful experience. So yes, I'm originally from France. My name is actually Marie-Pierre Stein, which is unpronounceable. So I go by Marie Stein. And as an artist, I use the name PM Neist, which is a fun anagram of my name. I've been thinking about what I wanted to say, and I think that mostly I'm a small-time rebel is what I am, and that has defined who I am as an artist. And I was thinking about that a great deal today, the small-time rebel. My rebellions have not been big. Like I've raised my children, I pay my taxes, I've had jobs. But I'm always interested in like the angle that's a little different. And I've chosen the field of embroidery, and I've been thinking a lot about that. And I think embroidery is a time rebellion, that our world is so hurried. We're asked to produce, we're asked to do things. And what better rebellion than pick an art that is very detailed and takes a lot of time, because I embroider by hand. I could embroider by machine. I choose not to. And for me, it's a statement that I want to reclaim my time, especially at this stage in life. And I think it's important. And I think as a lot of women, we're small-time rebels. You know, we raise the kids, we have jobs, we do things right. And I think for us, the world of fiber is kind of a safe place where we can explore our creativity. And we can be ourselves in a certain way. And it's generally not on the radar of the people around us. And that's the place where we can really discover who we are. So that's the journey I've been on, which really fits with the CST program.
Yeah, it does. So talk about your background, and I'm always curious, did you take a little class, that's where we start going off track, right? Did you take a class to learn to embroider, or did you teach yourself?
No, actually, you know, what's funny is so I was born and raised in France. Embroidery was mandatory in the 2nd grade.
Wow.
So I'm part of the very last generation of kids who learned to embroider in the 2nd grade in school, public school. It was an all-girls school, and we were asked to do samplers while listening to classical music, of all things. You know, not what you would think your 7-year-old would be doing. And I kind of rebelled almost immediately. I did my sampler, I did it fast, and then I'm like, oh, that's boring. I made a rooster, my own design. I'm like, to hell with it. You know, the sampler was like the typical red on white cross stitch, and my rooster was blue and orange and green, and it had personality. And I'm also part of the generation. I came to age in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. There were some very influential currents in France at that time. You had a bunch of people from the 60s who had created a renaissance of the artisanal movement. So you could go on vacation and see people who made clogs and embroidered and did all kinds of things. I learned sewing and kind of needlework from my grandmother, who is a woman who, you know, traditionally made all the clothes and things. But then at the end of the 70s, I grew up in a very industrial environment. It was very economically depressed and desperate. And you had the punk movement that came from England. And we took scissors to our clothes, and we just didn't hem stuff anymore. And there was a great deal of experimentation, and I loved it. And that was my rebellion, because I grew up in a very blue collar environment. I was going to go to college. I didn't have a place. And I expressed myself through clothing and experimentation, a lot having to do with fiber, a lot in these very well-to-do environments where I was kind of exotic. There was also a very influential French magazine called Santidé, 100 Ideas, and it's all online right now. And these were folks from the Royal School of Design in England, or they were influenced by that. They created this influential French magazine that came every month, and that showed how to design things that were beautiful. It showed the process that they used. It also showed very simple designs that you could then use and experiment with. So these were kind of my formative years. As a kid going to college, first time, to go to college, there was no question that I was going to go to art school. I was not going to put food on the table. And so I went another route, but I never lost that wanting to experiment.
Mhm. Mhm. So talk about the transition between that period and where you are. Well, transition many number of years. So how'd
Yeah.
that evolve?
Well, I think like many women, right, it took a path of, I'm going to find a job, I'm going to get married, I'm going to raise children, which I really wanted. I became very good at finding nooks and crannies. And I think a lot of us do that, right? It's like, okay, I'm not going to have the time to be a full-time artist. Where are my nooks and crannies? So I had these very serious corporate jobs in human resources, of all things. I was an executive, and I would go on these trips and take my sketchbook and sketch people in meetings, sketch the hands, like under the things, I would sketch on planes. I would sketch everywhere. And I became very good, like I said, at finding like this little sliver of time to develop my art. Eventually, once my children grew, I created like a tiny studio in my garage. I made a book. Didn't really work out. It was a fun book. Actually, I drew 3 books. So the first one was terrible, and the second one was a little better, and the third one was fun. And I found out it's not what I wanted. And eventually, on a trip to Paris, I walked into a thrift store and found this great big ball of yarn. It was just like this, and they're like, "We'll sell this to you for €2, which is like $2.50." And I had this apartment by myself in Paris, and it was an Airbnb for just a few days, and untangled the whole ball of yarn. I found some needles, and I went back to needlework. And I just thought, this is fantastic. This is what I love.
Hmm. Great. So what are your aspirations with it now?
Well, I'm going professional, right? So this is it. I gave up on the corporate life. Life is too short. I thought, okay, if I don't do this now, it's not going to happen. And I think that that's the part where many of us end up, right? It's like, okay, now I'm in my 50s. And I decided I am an emerging artist. I could have emerged in my 20s and do it only for 5 or 10 years. A lot of women have to do that because then they have families and children. So my timeline is no different from someone who is younger than I am, maybe. I think later in life, it's the question of untangling things. It's untangling the patterns, muting the voices that for so long have said you can't do this. I remember having a corporate job and being severely reprimanding from doodling because I doodle during meetings. And because you're an executive, you can't doodle during meetings. Those meetings are to be, serious. And a lot of these meetings are really boring, actually, doodling was a way to get through them. But then you have to mute those voices, Also, there's a lot of ageism going on. Those voices have to be muted. So I think that right now, do I have a strong voice? Yes, I do. how do I make that voice heard, and to whom? How do I go about it? It's an interesting issue. But I'd rather do that than, sit in an office and keep doing the same thing that I've done for 30 years.
Mhm.
So I don't have all the answers. I think later in life, though, I have a lot of skills. I have a lot of contacts. I think later in life, too, we have contacts that are very solid,
Mhm.
from people who are already ahead of us, or people who want to help others. And that's actually an advantage.
Mhm. Well, and it's advantage also when people really like what you're doing.
Yes, that's helpful too, right? So,
Yeah.
and I've developed a small following for that, and that's good, and I'm working at it.
Mhm.
I also have, business skills because of where I was before.
Mhm.
So that's very helpful as well.
Sure. Okay, so you walk out of your corporate life on Friday. I'm making this up. On Monday morning, you get up and you're an artist.
Yes,
How'd that go?
it's terrifying. It's really terrifying. Um, you know, Before the interview, I shared with you that I went to like a large commercial. It was the Emerging Artist. There's a large, commercial art festival. It was terrifying. Um, I think I think what is terrifying is the discrepancy between I left the field where I was at the top of my field. I was an executive. I was at the point where I could mentor other people because I knew everything about it. Now I'm starting in this new field where there's a lot of things that I really don't know. And I'm finding out. Some of them I'm finding out the hard way. Some of them I'm finding out the fun way. Um, but I'm just energized.
Mhm.
But frankly, I think it's no different. I have a friend who is a CPA. She's an accountant, and she moved from the top of her field to be, another kind of accountant in another field. She's finding out the same. She's facing the same issues.
Mhm.
Um, I think what works for me is that what I'm doing now is aligned with what I've wanted to do all my life. And so there's no doubt that I'm in the right place.
Mhm.
Um, how it's going to unfold, I mean, I don't know, but none of us know.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you use that word align because I was just thinking about how we talk about alignment in CST, and that sometimes in order to begin alignment again, we have to go back to the beginning, and we can have so much invested in where we were that we have a really, really hard time being a beginner again.
Yes, I think it's a couple of things. Number one is the humility to be a beginner.
Mhm.
And certainly the large event that I went to was a huge lesson in humility.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing is changing the perception of the people around us.
Mhm.
Uh, Starting with just something silly as my name.
Mhm.
I mean, it's like I'm known under a certain name because I started my transition to an artist while I was still working. I adopted another name as an art name. Now I'm thinking, is that really needed? Can I reconcile myself to who I am? How do I go about that? Um, these are all interesting questions. And then when you go to your family and suddenly said, "Oh, by the way, I'm an artist," you might as well tell them you're from Pluto. I mean, they're like, "What?" No, your mom, or you're the director of human resources, or you're this or that or the other. You're what? I mean, okay, they're like, "Oh, cute," how adorable of you. Um, but you'll really have to come out, and say, "No, no, 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 you don't understand. I don't just bake cookies.
Mhm.
I have this other persona, and there are some encouragements,
Mhm.
but there's also this bewilderment about who are you really?"
Mhm. Mhm. Interesting. Well, and I think that's also an interesting sort of ice rink that you're skating across in general because you're going out in the public and presenting your work. And of course, as you're referencing here, you were in an environment that didn't feel like it was a particularly great fit for you. And yet then we go back to the studio and we think, well, uh, what do first of all, am I going to change? And secondly, what am I going to change? And then it becomes one of those issues where we have to hold very tightly to who we are so we don't get lost in the shuffle of trying to be something we're not just in order to fit into a particular place.
Yes, I think that's very true. And at the same time, I just realized that being a professional artist requires a certain level of professionalism that I wasn't quite prepared for that thing. For example, I sold a piece, just a funny example, but I sell a piece and then suddenly, well, I just like, how am I going to package this? You know, my piece is, I think, priced fairly for my time, but I thought humbly, oh, I have like a bag from Whole Foods. I'm going to put it in there. I know that's not what you do at an event like that. Simple things, packaging, branding. How do you display things? There's a vast difference between I'm going to show a few pieces to some of my friends and people who are already supporting me to I'm going to sell pieces to a stranger who doesn't know me and is spending, you know, a good amount of money for my piece.
Yeah.
And these are very basic things that there are rules to the game that are very practical, like any other business, but I hadn't given that any thought. So, you know, it's fine. I mean, I have to accept that that there are things that I need to learn and think about. I think for me, it's not about talent, but there are lots of people who have talent. So talent is one thing, a voice is another thing, identity, and then learning the rules of the game, you know, in different environments. And I don't know that I'm going to excel again at an art festival. I don't know that it's for me, but I've, you know, set up an online shop, and that's another bunch of rules that I've had to learn as well. Literally, for an online shop, packaging is a big deal too.
Absolutely.
I created some things and then I have to go to a warehouse for the first time in my life and talk to a really nice guy who helped me find a box that fit what I make. It's silly, but these are all things to think about.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I have gradually learned those lessons kind of the hard way myself because you know, you can self-publish a book, but then you have to figure out how you're going to send it to somebody without all the corners getting dinged up.
Yep.
And on the larger picture, we have an addition to CST that we didn't have when you were in it. We now have a whole series of topical groups on Zoom. We have about 23 of them this year, and it's 10 or 12 or 15 people who all have a shared interest. And they meet at their own, you know, they're in charge of how it all goes, but they're loosely tied back to CST. And one of the groups is this year is actually a group that's looking at how to balance being a professional with being an artist, because in the beginning we don't know yet that there are so many other tasks that have to be done that are part of running the business, and rarely do any of us have the ability to hire other people to help us do that.
That's correct. Yes. And I think, you know, I have the skills to put an online shop together, but marketing is you know, I have to figure it out. Packaging is really a big thing. Yeah, accounting, you know, thank God I have a vast network of people in the business, but someone had to sit down with me and explain, how do you use QuickBooks suddenly? How do you price a commission? How do you do a basic contract for a commission? So these are all things that I have to figure out.
So when I'm doing a fast turn on you here. When you work, I'm interested in knowing how often you work, and I'm interested in knowing whether you have a sort of a strategy or a ritual, or when you begin your day, when you move into the studio, what do you do?
Yeah, I begin my day every day with research. So I begin at breakfast, and I'm very interested in both visual research and also methods. And so at breakfast, I'm always on an archive somewhere looking at images, or, you know, I read a whole thesis on mending, you know, so that I think keeps me connected to the work that I want to do. Typically morning. I'm not like so much of a morning person, so I spend my morning. I'm not creative first thing in the morning. So I spend the morning email, accounting, packaging, things that Julia don't like to do as much because I really want to create, right? So, I do that. I start really making things about 11 a.m. And right now my parents live in France, so I call them on the phone every day, and then I start my work right then with some stitching because it's something that I like to do when my brain is engaged elsewhere. So I always work with either while talking to other people on the phone or listening to podcasts or listening to series. Which is funny, like I have work and I'm like, oh yeah, I did that work. That was the entire Mad Men series, eight series. And anyway, so the afternoon I spent typically designing or stitching. So with the pieces that I do, there's a designing part of it, and then there's some stitching after that. I tend to work in the afternoons doing that, and then into the early evening. But I'm at it every day. So I cannot count the hours anymore. And that's why I'm a time rebel now, because that wouldn't make sense. And I've got to realize that's a corporate view of looking at things. And I cannot calculate like how many hours that it would take to do things because it takes however long it takes.
Yeah.
And then I have some rituals like, I devote Tuesday to marketing, to writing a blog, and then I schedule that later in the day.
Yeah, I've enjoyed those too. And we will share the links to those and to your website so people can see all the beautiful things you've been doing. And fun, entertaining,
Yes.
and challenging. The underlying rebel is always there.
I know, right? I can't escape that. So I think that's my life. It's going to be there for life.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm a small time rebel. I'm not out there doing really wild things. And I think it's not unusual for women to be small time rebels. We do certain small things that mean to us, but I'm not really out there marching for any cause either. That's not me.
Well, I think you're right. And I think a lot of the time, some of that low-lying rebellion is about time. Not only you've made such a beautiful point about embroidery being a rebellious act in that way, but I think everything else, everything we do has the potential to be that way. I know for me, people have said, how can you put all that time into that program and work every single day on it? And I think, well, you've never loved something as much as I love doing this. I don't get tired of doing it, and I don't keep track of how long it takes. Since I'm not ticking off how long it's taking, I don't have anything building up to resent.
That's true. And I think you're very right. I think that's also a very corporate mentality. I'm going to work 8 hours. I'm going to bill somebody for it. For me, I'm making a product and I just love it so much. Actually, stitching is the part that I really love. I really don't mind stitching for 12 hours. My hands do.
Yeah.
But I've heard you. It's a very physical work, which is very different from sitting behind a desk.
So do you have a basic practice of when you're stitching for a long time like that, do you get up and then, it's crazy, I've got a Subaru, and when you've been in the car for 2 hours, a little sound comes on and this little thing flashes up that says, you've been in the car for 2 hours, you should get out and walk around.
I wish. I'm learning the hard way. Sometimes my hands is burning so much I have to ice it, but I get so into it. Sometimes I just can't stop. I just want to do more. And me, the kind of stuff that I do, I think I go with very simple forms, but the stitching gets very intense. I just pile it on, and I just love doing it. So no, but I'm going to learn one day. I think when I heard enough, then I stop. Sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, that's a hard one to balance out. So
It is.
if you figure that one out, just let me know.
Right?
Well,
But, yeah, go ahead. I think there's this part too. I think at this time of life, I don't want to miss out on anything. I'm like, my time is much more important to me than early on. I don't have a minute to waste. So I can't wait to get up and do stuff.
Mhm,
And that's, I'm just going to take a big bite out of life right now.
mhm. I love that, and I agree. So how'd the pandemic affect you?
Well, everything kept crashing down, right? I had some pieces that were going to be in shows, and everything went online. It didn't really work out. I ended up, I think I was frozen for a little bit, and then I ended up making things and spending a lot of time experimenting. So that was great. And then I spent a lot of time making stuff. I did have a lot of time setting up a structure for myself, like my online shop and so on. So that was lovely.
Mhm,
I'm ready to go back. I had thought maybe about starting a few workshops and connecting with people. All of that, came to a screeching halt.
mhm,
So I'm wanting to go back to that. I think like a lot of people.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Well, and I think I know the answer to this question already, but I'm gonna ask it anyway because you never know for sure, but do you get stuck? Do you ever
You I don't. I'm the opposite. I have so many ideas that for me it's like how do I stop the flow?
Mm,
And actually I was going to show you like one of my practice for people who are like that is I have this sketchbook, right?
mhm,
And when I have ideas, I just like put it in the sketchbook because then it's parked somewhere.
mhm,
But you can tell it's like everything is like, oh, we have birds, we have writing, we have designs, we have all kinds of things. And so what I've learned to do is I gotta park it. It's gotta go someplace. I consign it to the sketchbook and then I can go back to it later.
mhm,
Because and then I think the issue with this, I'm kind of an over creative, is and that goes back to the idea of going to these art shows is when people don't know me, what do I want to show them? I can do lots of things.
mhm,
Um, but I think it's easier for people to say, oh, she's the person who does blank, Um, and because I think it's overwhelming to others sometimes how many ideas I have.
mhm, mhm. Well, actually, in April, we were studying the dilettante archetype and the idea that and I think what we all discovered is that we actually wanted to go back to the original definition, which was someone who's interested in lots of things in a positive way as opposed to it being in a negative way, which
Yep.
what the meaning, at least in the way that English has sort of co-opted it, shifted it. And I think what we began to recognize is that there's a lot of value in being a dilettante who has tried on lots of different things and gathered information from lots of different places, and literally the value of research, which we can, and for people who are having trouble with their child being able to play the child archetype, I suggested that they actually shift their thinking and what they call their play and call it research instead, because for a lot of people, it's easier to justify if it has a more official sounding name.
That's right. I totally agree with you. I think my process right now is to learn to keep the not to keep, but to reserve the dilettante for a private space,
Mm,
and then to really think in the public sphere. What do I want to show? I think also that the current push of social media means that what is demanded by social media is the opposite of the dilettante. It's who are you? You have 5 seconds to show us, and you better be consistent. When I look at how I've presented myself, I'm not that yet. I don't know that I will ever be 100%, but I think that there is a very strong current right now culturally to have everybody fit into a box.
mhm,
And so that has to be resolved somehow in the public sphere.
mhm. Well, I agree. And what you made me realize in saying that is that the the quintessential example of that is the elevator speech,
Yep.
where you have to figure out exactly what your focus is and be able to say it in some way that's significant before you lose the camera. In
Yes, absolutely.
fact, the elevator is a box that only goes up and down.
Yes, you're right.
Doesn't go laterally. I mean, you could get stuck in an elevator and it would be a terrible place to be with just you and your speech.
I know, and I'm a very passionate person. When I want to talk about stuff, I'm like, oh, and let me tell you, I know this, that, and the other, and I can see all of these connections. And yeah, I had to learn to, or I'm learning to tamp it way down. I haven't made a final choice yet, actually.
Yeah. Well, I actually think there's some rebel in that, recognizing that we can afford to be the dilettante over here in our sacred space with our sacred creating, and then we're going to take a portion of that, even though we know better about who we are, and that portion is what we're going to share with the world just to satisfy that option.
Yes, or to make the first connection. Because what I'm hoping is, once in a while I hit it off with someone who is equally passionate, and I'm going, oh, let me tell you about this and that and the other. And my blog is a little bit of that, right? People who subscribe to the blog, one day I talk about, the French le travail, and the next day I talk about something else. And these are the people who forgive me for, just being all over the place, which is nice. I get fan mail and I love that.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, it's a relief to see somebody out there being that way without apology, because that's how a lot of us would like to be, and we're fearful of it. We're fearful of the consequences.
And I think, again, that it's a very female issue, too. It's like, be a good girl, be seen and not heard. And if we take space, if we express our voice, it's like, oh, look at her. Here she goes again, So I think that that has to be navigated. What I enjoy about fiber, it's a very female space. Mm-hmm. And so when I say people forgive me, I think it's true, because they're equally, excited about talking about, nerding out about the French knot or whatever it is. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, great. I love it. I love it. Great. Well, this has been so much fun, and the time always goes way too fast, but I'm wondering if there's anything that you thought in advance about saying that you wanted to be sure to say to people as part of this discussion with me.
Yeah, I think what I want to say is it's never too late. It's never too late to connect with our creativity, to take a jump and to try something. Why not? It's not over until it's over. And that's it. And so I would encourage, I think CST is just such a wonderful class. And I shared with you too that you sent an email some time ago that I keep rereading, and that email is about all the messages that we hear about how we can't do this. And the truth is we can. And you are one of the people who are really making it your cause to let women find, mostly women, right? I think, find their place and their voice. And this is just such a tremendous gift. And certainly it's made a huge difference in my life.
Well, every time I talk to you, I get totally charged up, and I'm glad you gave me permission to nerd out over French today.
I have lots to say about French knots and Chinese knots and what have you. So
it's a real treat, and I appreciate your time. And everyone who sees this will wish you the best with everything you're working on.
Thank you, Jane. I really appreciate you as well.